Hello folks. Do you love camping, hiking or any kind of adventures like this? Well, these stories will make you think again before you go to an adventure. Story number 1. They went missing. Jacob and Zari were in love. A love that was shining like a star, so strong, so immovable that even the toughest storm will not be able to divide them. Jacob saw Zari as his queen, and Zari saw Jacob as her prince. One morning, they planned to go on a hiking into the woods of the small hilly area they stayed in. Somehow, they felt a connection between them and the woods, as if the woods were made for them. So, Jacob and Zari laughed and talked their way into the woods. Little did they know that the spirits of the woods resided there. One spirit in particular had been lurking around for centuries, ever since she had been cheated out of her life, her love, and her happiness. So, the spirit lay in wait for the unsuspecting couple, biding her time for the right moment. The hike was going swell until they both heard a voice in the woods. It seemed to be coming from someone near them, but when they looked around, they didn't see anyone. The voice seemed to be beckoning them, and they realized it was coming from the spirit of the woods. Zari felt a chill run down her spine and knew something was not quite right, but her love for Jacob had clouded her judgment, so she still followed him. Jacob was feeling an odd sensation in the air, and as they traversed further, he suddenly felt a sense of fear. He wanted to turn back, but Zari was still so excited that she didn't sense it. He looked around for a solution, and his eyes fell on a path that seemed to be leading them away from the big tree they were heading to for sightseeing. He said to Zari, "Let's take this path instead, it looks more peaceful." She agreed, and even though the path was a bit longer, it looked more tranquil and refreshing. Little did they know that this was the path that was leading straight to the spirit of the woods. When they reached the middle of the wood, they saw the spirit of the woods. The spirit immediately screamed out her rage and anger and cursed the two lovers who had disturbed her peace. The spirit then started to wave her hands and uttered words of vengeance. Jacob and Zari screamed out in fear and terror, but it was too late. Suddenly, an odd mist clung around them, and then the earth started to shake and move like an earthquake. Jacob and Zari were too scared to move, and they clung to each other, crying out for help. But it was not meant to be. The spirit's rage was too powerful, and Jacob and Zari were engulfed by the quivering ground and went missing forever. And so, the spirit of the woods had its revenge. For the ones that disturbs her peace will pay with their own lives. Story number 2. Vengeance. Carla and her family had decided to go on a camping trip. It had been their good tradition to do so every year since it was such a nice bonding experience for them. Carla was excited to get out into nature and explore her surroundings. However, little did they know what awaited them. When arriving and setting up camp, Carla's family all noticed something off about the area. There were strange howling noises echoing in the distance, and a dreading feeling in the air that no one could explain. They shrugged it off and enjoyed the night gathering around the fire and talking. Unbeknownst to this family, this area was the location of a former village, many years ago, and home to a native tribe. Many of the tribe were slain in a violent massacre, and their spirits remained here, never fully able to find rest. Carla and her family soon found out that these spirits had come to seek vengeance on any human who trespassed on their land. As the night wore on, Carla and her family were thrust into a terrible nightmare they could not escape. Strange figures emerged from the woods and began to attack them, refusing to leave until their cause was fulfilled. Carla and her family fought and screamed until they were too tired to continue and watched helplessly as the vengeful spirits descended upon them. Eventually, however, the spirits passed and the family was finally saved. Despite all the horror from that night, Carla and her family looked back on the experience and felt they learned an important lesson: to never take one's home lightly, and to treat others with kindness, even when differences exist. This would stay with them for the rest of their lives, and would always keep in mind the experience they had that night, their most unforgettable camping trip. Story number 3. Always be together. John and Selma had been together for 3 years and had been living a good life. They had done everything together, from going to the beach to visiting their respective families. Recently, they had started thinking about going hiking, something that they had always wanted to do but never got around to. So, one day, they decided to go to the nearby forest and embark on their first ever hiking trip. They packed the necessary items in their backpacks, got dressed in appropriate hiking attire, and took a taxi to the forest. Once inside the forest, they had a wonderful time, taking in the sights and sounds of nature. They climbed rocks and went over streams, and Selma even pointed out various flowers, birds and plants that she had learned about in school. But then, something happened that would change the course of their lives. They suddenly felt an eerie presence in the forest. It seemed like some sort of spirit had followed them. John and Selma wanted to ignore the spirit and keep going, but every time they moved, the spirit followed them. They looked around, but couldn't see anyone. Still, the feeling of being watched was intense. Then, out of nowhere, a voice spoke out in a cold tone. "You should have stayed away. It's too late now. I will take revenge on you both." John was shocked. As he tried to run away, he felt a sharp pain in his chest. He had been stabbed. Before Selma could do anything, the figure disappeared. John was taken to the hospital, but he had lost too much blood, and the doctors could not save him. Selma was devastated. After his burial, she spent hours at his grave, reflecting on what had happened. Finally, she decided to do something. She visited the forest again, this time determined to find out what kind of spirit it was. After doing some research, she discovered that years ago, 2 people had been killed in the same place. It had been a revenge plotted by a powerful spirit that could not rest in peace until his debt had been settled. Selma had stumbled into it, and it had taken the life of her beloved John. Selma vowed to make sure that the spirit found peace. She organized a memorial in the forest to pay respect to the spirit of revenge and make sure that his debt was paid. As soon as the ritual was completed, the spirit departed the forest with no more disturbances. Selma had managed to find closure and peace. She and John would always be together, no matter what. Story number 4. Unforgettable camping. The Davis family was looking forward to spending some much-needed time away together. After weeks of planning and anticipation, the family was finally on their way to a camping ground set deep within the forest. With their minds and hearts set on a serene getaway, none of the family could have anticipated the terror that lay in wait for them. Upon arriving, the family enthusiastically set up camp and explored the environment before settling in for the night. However, as darkness fell, the surrounding atmosphere began to shift. Sounds of wood creaking, branches snapping, and ghostly chants echoing through the night filled the family with dread. What was once a tranquil scene was now a frightful vision. Terrified of the unnatural sounds, the family decided to huddle within their tent to protect themselves. Although the strange occurrences died down as nightfall passed, relief was yet to be found for the family. As the sun began to set the following day, an eerie fog shrouded the forest in a heavy stillness. A nearby lake was said to be home to a vengeful spirit who sought revenge on those who disturbed the peace of the forest. The Davis family's chance meeting with this spirit was to be one of the most unforgettable experiences of their lives. What seemed to be an innocent night spent outside with the stars quickly changed as a figure of smoke emerged from the lake. An eerie light shone on its face, exposing its ghoulish figure to the family. Furthermore, it spoke of its long wait for revenge and its everlasting hatred for any who disturbed the stillness of the forest. Without warning, the creature unexpectedly attacked the family and subjected them to its wrath. Frightened and horrified, the family watched in shock and fear as uncertainty filled the air. After what seemed like an eternity of suffering and anguish, the family was finally able to escape the forest with their lives. However, all of their belongings were left behind in the woods, including any memories that had been made before the attack. This was to be the Davis family's most unforgettable camping trip, as they were left with nothing but the horrors of their experience with the vengeful spirit, a terrifying reminder of what happens when you disturb the peace of nature. Story number 5. Endearing One. Luke and Annabelle had been each other's beloved for the past few years, and finally, they decided it was time to take their relationship to the next level. After months of planning, they set out for an epic hike, one they would always remember for its spectacular beauty and amazing views. The sun was just ready to dip behind the horizon, casting a golden hue on everything. The air was filled with the scent of wildflowers, and the sound of birds chirping was soothing and inviting. Together, they hand in hand explored the trails, taking in the glorious scenery and breathing in the clean fresh air. But what they did not know was that they were walking on cursed ground. An ancient Native American tribe had once called this land home, and it is said they could command wind and rain, manage fire and even control animals. One of the members of the tribe had been wronged by settlers and, despite being dead, his spirit remained, forever seeking revenge. After a few hours, Luke and Annabelle's peaceful hike was interrupted. The sun had set, throwing the area into darkness, and a chill had descended over the land. A thick fog began to roll in, blocking out the stars and moon. Suddenly, a figure appeared in the mist. His long dark hair hung down to his waist, and his cold eyes glowed with a sinister intensity. Instinctively, the couple knew this figure was far from a harmless hiker. Luke and Annabelle quickly turned to flee, but before they could, the figure had already vanished. Almost immediately, they began to hear hollow laughter from somewhere in the darkness. Then, without warning, the ground beneath their feet began to rumble. Rocks and debris sailed up into the air, and it seemed as if the land itself was about to come alive. The two lovers fled, trying to outrun the revengeful spirit. But no matter how fast they ran, it seemed like they could not get away. Eventually, they stumbled upon a gully, but it was too late. The spirit was already there, looming over them with a menacing intent. Luke and Annabelle held each other in fear as the spirit moved closer. In one moment of desperation, Luke begged for them to be spared, but the spirit had no mercy and cursed them both to death. As Luke and Annabelle's lifeless bodies lay, the spirit vanished back into the night, never to be seen again. For years, travelers along the same trail heard stories of two lovers who failed in their efforts to flee a revengeful spirit, and the incident became a cautionary tale about the dangers of nature. Despite the tragedy, the story of Luke and Annabelle's last journey together will always remain an endearing one. All stories ends here. That's all, folks. Please subscribe, and stay tuned for the next haunted stories. Until next time.